Game Theory Class 3 Video 2. In this video we're going to introduce the notion of a dominance relation in terms of the strategies for players in a game. So dominance relations, the idea is they help you compare different strategies. So they help compare different strategies. And I ultimately, you want to be able to say something like, in some situations, in some particular games, maybe this strategy is always better than that strategy. And that's where dominance comes in. So let's just go straight to the definition. It's a long definition, but I think once you see some examples, it's actually, it's not too bad. So let's begin. First of all, we say that A and B be strategies in a game. So I'm just, like these are my variables which represent strategies in a game, A and B. The first part of the definition says that A weakly dominates B if A is always a better than or equal to response to every one of the opponent's strategies than B is. So the idea is no matter what your opponent does, it's always like better than or equal to play A than to play B. Okay? And this is called weakly dominant. And in this case, where A weakly dominates B, we use this notation. It's like the greater than or equal to notation. Okay? And the second part of the definition says A strictly dominates B if A is always a strictly better response to each of your opponent's strategies than B is. So it doesn't matter what your opponent chooses to do, it would always make more sense for you to do A than to do B. That's what strictly dominant means. And in this case, we write A strictly bigger than B. So this is the definition for dominance relations. There's two parts. There's the weakly dominant and the strictly dominant. I will say that sometimes in questions or exams or homeworks, it won't say weakly or strictly, it will just say dominant, like show that A dominates B. And unless it has unless it explicitly says strictly, you should assume it means weakly. Okay? So if the question reads, show that A dominates B, you should assume that it means show that A weakly dominates B. Let's do an example. So the question is, calculate all of the dominance relations for this following game. So that means I need to compare all of the strategies and see if there's any relations, any dominance relations. There isn't always dominance relations between any pair of strategies. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. The only way you know is by testing it out. So for example, let's begin by testing out A and B. So I'm going to test out A and B. I want to know which one, if there's a dominance relation between A and B. Well, let's just consider this. I know that 3 is bigger than 1, but 2 is bigger than 1, and 3 is bigger than 2. So what does this mean? This means that sometimes it's better for player 1 to play B, and sometimes it's better for player 1 to play A. There's not one strategy which is always the best in all situations. So that means that there is no dominance relation between A and B. Because sometimes it's better to play A and sometimes it's better to play B. So there's no dominance relation between A and B. Okay, so let's try a different pair. Maybe we'll try B and C. Okay, let's try B and C. Well, if we consider B and C, we see that 4 is bigger than 3, 6 is bigger than 1, and 3 is bigger than 2. So C is always the better thing to do. Right? No matter what player 2 does, it's better to play C than it is to play B. In fact, it's strictly better to play C than it is to play B. So this means that C strictly dominates B. Okay, C strictly dominates B. Now let's compare A and C. Okay, well, I can't really draw. Well, okay, I can sort of draw. So 4 is bigger than 1, 6 is bigger than 2, and 3 is greater than or equal to 3. Okay, that might seem like a stupid thing to say, but it's actually not that stupid. It's perfectly true. 3 is greater than or equal to 3. So what does this mean? This means that C is not always the strictly better thing to do, but it's always the better than or equal thing to do. Which translates into, if you go back to our definition, the fact that C weakly dominates A. It's weak because there's a 3 here and here. If this 3 was like a 4, then we would have that C strictly dominates A. But it's not, it's a 3. Okay? And this means that it's a weak dominance. So that's all the dominance relations for player 1. Okay? This is player 1's dominance relations. Now we need to do player 2. So let's consider X and Y. And when you're doing these sort of questions, it's guaranteed that at some point you'll compare the wrong numbers. You'll make a mistake and you'll compare the wrong numbers. Everyone does it. It's hard not to do this, right? When I'm comparing X and Y in terms of dominance relations, the numbers I care about are 2 and 3. I care about the payoffs for player 2. Okay? And what do I have? I have that 2 is less than 3, 1 is less than 2, and 3 is less than 5. So it's always strictly better for player 2 to choose Y than it is for player 2 to choose X. This translates into the fact that Y strictly dominates X. Okay, let's move on to Y and Z. I'm comparing Y and Z. So I have that 3 and the 1. 3 is strictly bigger than 1. 2 is strictly bigger than 1. And 5 is strictly bigger than 0. Okay? So what does this mean? This means it's always in player 2's interest to play Y instead of playing Z, because Y always gives them a better payoff. This translates to the fact that Y strictly dominates Z. Lastly, let's compare X and Z. Okay? So I'm comparing 2 and 1. Well, 2 is bigger than 1. 1 is bigger than or equal to 1. And 3 is bigger than 0, is strictly bigger than 0. So this means that X is always the better than or equal to choice as opposed to Z. Okay? Playing X, you're always going to be in a better than or equal to position than if you play Z. So this translates to the fact that X weakly dominates Z. And these are the dominance relations for player 2. And that's the end of this example. Okay. Before I finish the video, I will say that this notion of dominance relations is going to come up again and again, and it's going to be central to some of the later concepts in this module. So it's important that you get a handle on it. Okay. So I highly recommend that if you didn't understand this example, you try and work through it again. You go to the notes or you ask your recitation leader for help. This notion of dominance is going to be very important in this module. That's the end of this video.